call it. So here's two cases from the America's Cup that really say you could have used, you didn't have to have such fancy GPS for these two situations. So does that mean we can say, well, oh, let's put these on our boats? Well, not yet. Let's talk about it a little bit more. First of all, these boats are going very fast. So a lot of our everyday situations are not quite so dramatic. You think about some maybe drifting up to the mark at 4 knots in light wind, and there's somebody next to you, and often protests come about, did someone break an overlap in time or not? And then it's a question of differential speed. You're going 4 knots, another boat's going 4.1, so very slowly you're drifting apart. Where did the overlap break? At that stage, a meter accuracy maybe matters. So there's going to be situations where you can't always tell it just from the GPS, but then there's going to be a lot of situations where you can easily tell it. And if you're honest about it, often your own judgment on the water is not nearly a good to a meter, not or half a degree of heading. Like which of us can tell to within half a degree where we're heading when you're actually on the water? So the GPS, the consumer GPS, is not perfect for all situations, but I've gone and picked 2 cases out of America's Cup where it would have done just fine, and there's going to be many cases where it would do just fine. And so having showed you that, I kind of want to then go to think about what could happen next. So really 3 things could happen next for club sailors. One is real-time tracking. Well, that can happen already, actually. You can buy tracking devices that use cellular data connections to track people. And the GPS is already more than good enough to be able to follow a fleet. You can imagine you have all these optimists and people you could follow your kid around. And the issue today is that the radio links are the constraint. When people take too many of these systems out, it clogs up the data links. The cellular systems generally aren't set up to support that much traffic out on the water, and so when you have, people have tried this in some fleets, when you get to more than about 30 boats using the cellular data connection, it clogs up the network, and then people can't communicate with the bridge, and the committee, the clubhouse can't communicate with the committee boat, and so on, and it's a problem. But it's a solvable problem, and it's a whole other talk to talk about how it would be solved, but I'll give you a little hint of what's in the future. And again, it's consumer technology that could be used for us sailors. And what it is cars of the future are all going to talk to each other with some kind of variant of Wi-Fi, and you all know how ubiquitous Wi-Fi is now. And all the cars out on the road, if you like, from a technical point of view, kind of like a fleet of boats. A lot of cars, they will all talk to each other, and there'll be relay networks set up. And that kind of technology will come into your phone, and we can make use of that. So there's solutions to the radio constraint, and so you could track these boats. And remember I said, if you want the video, if you want the LiveLine video, like you had in the America's Cup, the accuracy on the boat's not that important, it's really the accuracy in the helicopter. So we could bring in a helicopter here, and there's only one of those needed. So you could spend that $100,000, several $100,000 just once, and start having televised events like World Championships and so on, not just America's Cup. So that's something to look forward to in the future. Number 2 is data for the protest room. So this is just something like having a black box. You would collect data and without a radio, so you get around the radio constraint. And typically, what would you want? Well, you'd want a good enough antenna like this one, like this patch antenna. You don't need the $1,500 one. You want something like this. You'd need wind direction, of course, to know which is leeward and windward. And by the way, you also need a boom sensor on a typical boat, because if you're DDW, port or starboard is determined by which side is your main on, which side is the boom. So you have to put in some boom sensor. This is a simple enough thing to do if somebody goes and builds such a system. And then as I've showed you, the GPS and the sensors are good enough in many, many cases to be able to take to the protest room and show, here's the situation. If both boats have it, then it really helps things. And I've made this presentation actually more of a data-rich, techie version to International Sailing Federation Technical Committee, and this is what they're thinking about, where they want to see this stuff move into the typical fleets. But for real. But it's a lunch talk I wanted to do beyond that. I wanted to do like, okay, what's better than that? And of course, real-time umpiring. What could we do for real-time umpiring? Well, at least we'd need the black box from the white box. And then we'd also need a radio link to the committee boat. So we'd have to solve this radio link problem that I talked about. And we'd have to have something interactive. You need a protest button just like they have, and a penalty light. But there's fairly simple things to do if you had already had that white box filled out. And then you'd have to have clubs. If we're going to do this, you need some club to accept experimental rules, at least for some regatta, where everyone plays by those rules and agrees that we're all going to have this black box on the boat, and we'll have the data feeding back just like I've showed you, and an umpire making a call, and we'll agree that if you get penalized, you do 360 or whatever's agreed upon, and continue. And so that of the three things, that's the hardest to achieve, but it doesn't take that much, given what I've showed you about the data. And if you think that we're here in Silicon Valley, the resources for this are here, the forward-looking clubs are here. So if you ask, is this possible? It's definitely, this is possible. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this is likely, given the environment we're in here. It's certainly a whole lot more likely than the idea that we would have ever seen 72-foot foiling catamarans sailing by here at 40 knots. So that's the thought I want to leave you with. Thanks very much.
Go ahead and take some questions, Frank.
Sure. Yeah.
What is the location of the antenna on the 72s?
Okay, so what is the location of the 72s? There's the thing they call the Christmas tree out the back. I don't know if you can see it in some of these pictures. If you go back, yeah. So there's this pillar out the back there. It stands up nice and high, about this high, and then they put the antenna right up there. So it's really, ideally, it's perfectly located. They put it as far away from everything else to avoid any reflections or interference, and so on. So that's what it is. The boat's actually part of the design. On a club boat, you want to have some kind of box that you agree to put somewhere, and that would affect the accuracy a little bit. So it would make it harder to get 2 centimeters, but we're not going to get 2 centimeters anyway.
But a masthead would be way off.
Well, masthead would be a bad idea because you want the whole. Remember, you've got this inertial system in there. You want it mounted. What I imagine is we'll see boxes that have a big arrow that say fore aft, and you mount it in the center line of the boat and say everybody's heading information would all be this. Will reference the same thing. Yeah, and of course, so masthead you lose the heading information, and of course you get the lever arm. So you want to send the line of the boat, maybe just after the mast. It would differ according to different classes. There'd have to be some agreement. So a lot of making this happen is technical, but there's also got to be it's got to be like a group come together, a club, the right techie people, the right funding, all comes together and work all these things out and do it. None of this stuff is insurmountable by any means, including where do you put the thing.
For the on-the-water umpiring, the compute power that you need to actually put that display up with the lines, not the television on the helicopter. Is that sort of a laptop on a boat out there, or do we have to dedicate a room of?
No, that's a laptop on a boat. That's very So that's very simple. So Sergei Patrovaz, my colleague here, we've worked together many years, and he'll do it in an afternoon.
Okay.
Frank, one of the figure of merit I think of most important that everybody's watching was the velocity made good. The actual in the airplane, you say, what's your ground speed? What are you actually going to? Is that well, first of all, does that figure, which is shown on the TV, do the boats know that figure, or where is that computed? I guess.
Okay, so velocity made good. So towards the end of the races, they started to show that, particularly both on the beats and on the runs. They were showing a little triangle, and they were showing you the speed projected onto downwind or upwind. And that's, so for the TV, that was computed offline. That's LiveLine doing that. The tacticians often have that themselves, but it's a different thing.
Okay.
So that would be automatically part, let me jump to this last picture. That would, if you put in any system where you're doing real-time tracking, and you have the wind information, you need the wind information. But as long as you've got the wind information, that's an easy thing to do. And of course, very useful for people watching the race to see someone's tracking off, someone's going closer to the wind,
right.
who's doing better.
But they didn't have that available to the actual.
No, the tacticians do have that, but not the very same stuff. They had their own systems.
But they had on board that they were computing their own velocity.
Yeah, they do. Basically, so in a lot of boats nowadays, where you've got the GPS, your systems on board will already separate true from apparent wind, right? And so I'm sure a lot of you have got that on your boats. And once you've got the true wind, then the velocity, you can do velocity made good to the wind, which is really what you want, either upwind or downwind. And so when those guys were looking at their little iPads, they weren't really iPads, but they had their little, the tacticians would have these things strapped to their chest, and they were looking at them. They have that information available,
okay.
But locally computed.
Okay.
right? They don't have any.
It wasn't identical to the one that was
No,
on the TV.
it's doing a similar thing, but it's locally computed because they're not allowed to have access to this outside information. Other questions? Oh, yes, questions. Yes.
When that luffing happened, it was either before or after the start,
Right.
and they called the weather boat for not coming up high enough, not, how did they know that, I didn't see in that diagram the true wind. So I don't know if that weather boat hadn't gone up to dead end to the wind.
Right. It did. So it did go head to wind. Now the thing
Well,
about true and
it
apparent,
didn't.
once you head to wind, it's the same thing. So it takes care of that. And what they ruled is he didn't luff hard enough. He was give way boat, and he had to luff and keep out the way.
Yeah.
And he luffed slowly, and he didn't luff enough to keep out the way. So he didn't only have to go, he has to go head to wind. He's allowed to be luffed head to wind, but he still has to keep clear. Right? The onus is on him to keep clear. So you can't just luff head to wind and say, I'm done. He luffed head to wind, and then when the current was coming in, he drifted down onto Oracle. So he was penalized for not luffing aggressively enough, and also, so really what he had to do was luff and actually tack. He had to keep clear. And the only way for him to keep clear with the current coming would have been to tack.
Well, tacking would have thrown the stern of the
Maybe, but then
into the
it's,
weather boat.
you know how it is in a lot of these tactics books with how do you get out of this situation? Don't get into that situation. And he hadn't gone early enough, and that's what they determined. And really primarily, according to Stan, from the heading and the most important data from that book was heading and track information off that boat, which is interesting for us to know. Until I really talked this through with Stan, it never occurred. We were watching this and getting excited about it. Imagine how excited you'd be about those situations when it's your business on the line, right? Because the system itself is being judged when everyone's watching it. And at no time in the whole event, as I remember, was the system ever called into question, which was quite a big deal because that wouldn't have been any fun.
Did they have more than one helicopter?
Three.
Three helicopters. Yeah.
And do you have another question?
No, I'm saying
Oh, right.
I've been retired a long time. How many birds does an airplane have to look at for a complete instrument approach? You said you could get 2 position fixes off of one.
Well, you can get 2 measurements off of one satellite, but you need several to do an instrument approach. A lot of airplanes now land with GPS, by the way. I don't know if you know that, and sorry if I make you worried next time you land. But that's the fact. And maybe you feel good because you've seen that all this great accuracy. But the theoretical limit is you've got to have at least 4 satellites in view to get a 3-dimensional position. But to be able to do an instrument landing, they demand much more than that. They demand something like, it's not a hard number, something like 8 satellites. It's enough satellites that if any one of them uses bad measurements, the combination of the others is enough that they can identify this guy's the odd measurement out and they can reject it. So they have, they're very stringent, which is good. When I've done some work with the FAA, when they look at probabilities of failure, they want numbers like 10 to the -7 of the probability that anything would happen, which is good. There's 1 in 10 million chance that anything should happen. And sorry, Jack, you're a pilot, so maybe you should.
No, I was just going to ask another question.
Oh, okay. So to land an aircraft, they want a lot of satellites. Seeing as this came out, one thing I didn't mention, just not to get too into the detail, but if you bought a cell phone, a smartphone, particularly in the last year, you don't just have GPS in there. Almost certainly you have GPS and GLONASS. GLONASS is the Russian GPS. And the satellites, they're global. So we can see their satellites, they can see ours. And now we use both, which I really like because it makes the system work better. And also, why should we pay for all this satellites?
That was going to be my point, the fact that we use GPS as if that's the only constellation up there, but we are actually using the Russian and soon to be using some other countries also. Right?
Yes. So so in America's Cup boats, this system uses both the American and the Russian satellites, and this phone, same thing. So I didn't want to. It's nice just to say GPS. Everyone knows what you're talking about, so I don't want to take time saying that up front, but that's the fact. So in that sense, if you look at how do they compare, it's equivalent again. Okay.
Very good. Terrific. To have a sailor in it.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
He's my tactician.
Not fair.
I think two things. I know this was recorded today. One thing I am inspired to do is have our executive race committee view the tape. Or maybe there'll be a time when we can convince you to come back and do an evening presentation for some of our techies who are the people who run the race committees for this club. This was very worthwhile. Frank, thank you very much.